Hello, everyone, and welcome here to a little bit of a rundown ahead of the PCS playoffs here in the summer. And who is going to Worlds? I'm joined today by MoleculeLOL. He is a very prominent member of the sort of APAC analyst community. He spends a lot of time not only in the APAC, but certainly the premier analyst that looks over our regions, being the VCS, LJL, bit of the LCO, and of course the PCS. He's spent time on the Gigabyte Marines or GAM Esports, as well as Frank Esports, who are joining us in the PCS playoffs. And how are you doing today, Molecule? Everything going well?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. I'm happy to be here and hopefully be able to dissect some of these teams.
Well, I'll start with what I think might be the most interesting series coming into the first stage of the playoffs, being in, at least for my opinion, Ground Zero going up against J-Team. I'll talk a bit about Ground Zero, of course, being from Oceania. I have a bit of pride here and hoping they do well. Hoping they're the first team to actually get a win against the PCS. And so I'll let you do the J-Team rundown if you're okay with that. And
Sure.
So for Ground Zero, their strengths is jungle and top. They play very well together. Tien and Schönfire, a lot of experience, something like 10, 11 years now of professional League of Legends experience. He spent time at the top of the Korean ladder in the past and definitely has what it takes to perform at international events. He's been able to have good showings in the past. And so I think going up against J-Team, having Lalva, who has looked like one of the weaker junglers in the PCS, I think this is a very good, strong point for Ground Zero, as well as you got to consider, I guess, at least in my opinion, jungle and the amount of impact jungle has is very, very prominent in who is able to pick up a win. I mean, we see that in like PSG Talon, right? Ginger kind of dominating everyone, and PSG likewise are just dominating. You kind of go down the list, and that holds true for most teams. So I think Ground Zero actually have a very good shot, probably the best shot LCO has ever had in taking a win against the PCS. But I want to hear from you. What do you think J-Team's strengths are? Where do you think they can find a win in this series?
Okay, I think J-Team, they should be considered probably the favorite just because they are from the PCS. They're very reliable and very standard. They do have one of the better mid laners. He is up and down, obviously, all the time, but he has consistently shown up when it comes to these sort of playoffs against weaker teams. Against the bigger teams, he might choke, and he did that last year, which sucked. But overall, I think Minji with his champion pool is going to be pretty good going into this playoffs, especially as we're going on to patch 0.15. And there could be the chance of these melee champions, things like Silas and Aurelia, coming back. And that is his speciality. When you think of Minji, it's Ahri and Silas, even though he's just like spamming Azir, Tristana, all these AD carries, but everyone is. But if we do go back to these melee champions, J-Team are way, way better than what people should think they are, because he can carry them. That bot lane is pretty stable, top is fine, jungle is a weak point, as you say. But I just think the class of the PCS overall might just shine over them. It's only a best of 3, so I do worry when LCL loses one game. They look a bit tilted, they look a bit triggered. This has happened the past couple playoffs where they come in, first game they get blown out, and they're just completely mentally gone. And I really hope they don't do that, because they do have a chance versus J-Team. But I think J-Team is probably still the favorite just because of the pedigree of the PCS. It's just a bit better. The cohesion, they're settled, there's no jet lag, there's no issues of scrims. Everything that comes in is always going to be stacked against the LCO team. But I do agree, if there was a time for the PCS to lose to LCO, I think this is probably the series for it.
In the LCO and in Oceania, you're we are, I guess I should say, very geographically challenged. You know, like we can only scrim legitimately against other teams in Oceania. Just because if you're playing against anyone else, you are on at minimum 150 ping, unless you're in Perth where you get 80. And you go to the PCS teams, you know, you have the opportunity to scrim anyone, VCS, LJL. You can even go to, you know, some of the challenger teams in Korea and China. And I think that, you know, not only does it give you more opponents to scrim, but also different styles of teams to scrim, which gives you practice in different situations, I guess, objective setups and team fighting ideas, or like ways to look for team fightings. How much do you think that hinders LCO's opportunity to not only win a series in the finals, but just grow sort of as a region?
I think it's gigantic. It's completely insane, the difference in scrims, because even if you're J-Team, who's a lower PCS team, they can still look to VCS, LGL. They can maybe get some Korean, probably the Academy Series, maybe not even Challenger League. But the top 4 PCS teams, they get S tier scrims. They will play against LPL teams. They will play against the good Challenger League teams. They get the top VCS whenever they want. And it's always available because scrims get cancelled quite frequently. There's always something happening. And I'm sure that happens a lot in LCO too, where, I don't know, someone just doesn't want to show up for a day, the scrim's cancelled, and you can't find a new block. But at least in the rest of APAC, scrim gets cancelled, you drop a message in the Discord, you've got a new scrim within 20 minutes. It's very easy to find new scrims, and I think that's incredibly important for growth across the whole year. At the start of the year, we had the in-houses, which actually helped a lot for teams to start to get to know other GMs and other coaches, and it really helped with VCS and PCS teams getting a lot better scrims because they have just been in contact and communication with these coaches, and they've shown the other players they're not terrible. Because when we started the in-houses, the Koreans and Chinese players thought, oh, PCS, VCS players, ooh, we don't want to touch this. But some of them play really well, and they get the respect of the other players, and that gets pushed up to coaches. And you can just improve, and it's like kind of like a staircase where at the start of the year, you scrim against bad teams, and then you work your way up. If you do well in PCS, you can get better scrims. Everyone kind of knows each other, and it's hugely impactful. I really struggle to understand how LCO even competes as well as they do, because they have good players, but they have to scrim against each other. And with that issue of scrimming against each other, you're also hiding things. You know you're going to play against them the next week or later on in playoffs. You can't show everything you want to show. You're hiding things. You don't want to show your best champions. You don't want to show your best strategies. You're probably scared to death that someone's going to leak your strategy or copy your strategy. So everything you kind of got to keep in-house, and then you're kind of first timing on stage. But compared to the PCS, you can just do whatever you want. They can practice with anyone they want. They've got an academy league. They've so many teams for them to scrim and practice against that. I heard that in spring, the 2 LCO teams, when they came, they got different difficulties of scrims. I think it was Ground Zero. They went for the better scrim approach because I talked to both the teams getting their scrims, and they got a mixed bag, which I told them was the best thing to do. When they come, try and get some good scrims, they're super excited. Like they want to scrim against PSG, CFO. And I'm like, great, but you don't want to go 0-6 and just be mental boomed. So put in some lower teams there just to adjust. And that's what they did. And I think that's what helped them a little bit when they came in spring. The other LCO team had an all-star scrim lineup, and I'm pretty sure they got smashed every day, which was not ideal. So I'm hoping this time, Team Bliss, I hope they go for a bit of a mixed bag as well as Ground Zero, because it's really important when they get here, they experience the variety in scrims instead of scrimming against the best teams. Because I don't know the exact scrim culture in LCO, but I don't expect they go 100% every day. But in PCS, VCS, LGL, most of the teams are mega tryharding every single scrim, and especially when it comes to playoffs. So they're going to go from the scrim culture in LCO of hiding picks and a little bit scared into just full-on competitive matches in their scrims, which is going to be a big shock to them, I think.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like that is kind of a hurdle that feels near on impossible to climb, like an impossible mountain to get over. And
it really is.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's times where, I mean, especially last year when LCO was over, you know, we had kind of the only times they were able to find wins in series was just one mega pop-off from a player, right? Like BioPanther was able to get a pop-off on Renekton over, I believe it was DCG, Hanabi. He was able to just solo carry a game, and likewise in the summer, it was Raze on, well, who was it? I think it was Draven. He actually just got a pop-off game and managed to get them over. But then obviously we didn't see that in spring. And honestly, part of it, I mean, I should come back and thank you as well for those in-houses, because as, you know, I'm not only a caster here for the PCS, but I am very much passionate about it and a big fan. And there is a level, like a massive level up that came through from last year to this year. And the results have just shown it, right? Like PSG, they came into last split. They were looking a little rough, but as time progressed, they just got better and better. Every other team also has just leveled up. And I think giving some of these players the opportunity, not necessarily only in their own teams, but just in a 5v5 competitive environment, playing against the likes of, you know, Chovy, Keen, whatnot, that is just so invaluable. Just having that a level of practice that is available, and, you know, yourself setting that up is a really massive step for APAC as a whole. So yeah, thank you for that. Of course,
That's okay.
the results are proven as well. You know, MSI, nobody in the world expected PSG to go 5 games against BLG. They did it, and it didn't even look like a fluke, at least in my eyes, right? Like, there were games where PSG are down like 4K gold and managing to turn those games around. Likewise, they were up 4K gold and then unfortunately got beaten in that game. So they are just going toe-to-toe now with the best teams, and seeing, you know, the split DCG able to do that, it means, at least in my eyes, the region is just continuing to level up, which is very promising. Now, I want to quickly touch on, I guess we talk about quickly CFO versus Sengoku. Now, I am of the opinion that this should probably be a very clean 2-0 in favor of CFO. Obviously, there has been a bit of some road bumps along the way for CFO this split, but ultimately it has only really been against PSG Talon and DCG. And I'm kind of willing to forgive that just based entirely on how well those two teams have been performing. And on the other side, you know, Sengoku, they're the 3rd seed coming out of the LGL. They got 3-0'd by DFM, who subsequently got 3-0'd by SoftBank Hawks. So it does seem like there are kind of tiers to the LGL teams coming over, and Sengoku maybe can be comparable to V3, who came over last split.
I agree that I think CFO is quite favored. I think a 2-0 or 2-1 is quite likely. However, I do not think they are comparable to V3. I think they are head and shoulders above. And it's mainly because of Jet. Okay. They have 3 Koreans in their roster, so most LGL teams do at this point. But Jet was not playing in spring. He didn't have a visa or some sort of residency, but he now does in summer. So he's back, and he's kind of the LGL king that never wins. He's the scrim god. He's just amazing. And then on stage, can't get it together. But against lower tier teams, he just smashes them. He's just farming them. And against the top teams, he just can't pull it off. And that's what I'm trying to work out, how well he's going to do in this playoffs. Because going in to this PCS playoffs in LGL, Jet has actually looked quite bad, in my opinion. This is the first time where I've watched him and I've thought he's actually a liability to the team. Because their mid and support are 2 Koreans who are probably the more famous and most popular on the team. And everyone watches LGL and they will say, oh, the Japanese people are the weakness, the top and the AD, they're not Korean, blah, blah, blah. But they're kind of a known quantity and they do what you expect of them. But on SJ, Jet and the support, I think it's like Gang, Gang really needs to step up. Jet has a very strong laning phase, which might just be the only thing that's going to help them beat CFO is if they just smash mid. He's only going to play the AD carries. He's going to play Lucian, Zeri, Tristana, whatever. He's tried and true. He only sticks to the LCK picks at the moment, which pains me to death. But if SJ did have a chance to win, it would be Jet actually stepping up, because the playoffs, he's just been playing bad. And this is a very good player. So if he steps up, they could actually challenge DFM. And I know that SG are actually scrim gods. Everyone calls them scrim gods in PCS and VCS. Everyone knows they can be very good. But can they get it together on stage? Versus DFM and SHG, I don't know if there's a mental block or just everything on stage just goes terribly wrong. LGL is a little bit slower on stage. You can kind of compare it to like a mini LCK. I think PCS is a lot faster. But CFO also plays a quite slow game, which does go slightly into SJ's sort of territory and an LCK-esque style, where the game is a bit slower, it's more Korean style, and that could go in the favor of SJ. But I do think top and bottom should just get blown out. Okay. So despite them being like the known quantity and it's been okay in LGL, I think versus CFO, top and bottom is just going to get blown out and it's going to be a big problem. So I do agree. A CFO should win.
Also, okay. Do you ever think there's an angle where CFO bring in Honu during the playoffs? Like maybe not in the first series, maybe in the first series, get him some stage time, and if he doesn't perform, put in Gory afterwards. Because at least from what I saw against DCG, Chris Gard is possibly the hardest mid to have your very first PCS game against. And he did, obviously not that well in the Corki game, but I think his Azir game was relatively good. And obviously there's some mistakes where he's probably not where he needs to be at times, but I think ultimately you could see him kind of leveling up as that series progressed, right? In the games, he was sort of finding his place, and maybe it's like getting over nerves or just being able to play with the team better as he's had more time on the actual stage. Do you think there's actually a chance CFO do bring him out?
I think there is a slight chance. I don't think it would be in the first round versus SG, as I think that is much more difficult than round 2 if they play J Team or Ground Zero. He could come out then. I do think his debut was kind of a little bit premature and a bit forced by the fans. The org felt very pressurized into playing him. He came of age. Everyone wants to see him. They push him in. He doesn't do as well as people hope, but like you say, I think he did pretty well given the circumstances. But if they do want to win, they probably should just stick with Gory. I hate the idea of splitting scrims, especially between two players who are probably quite different in practice. And in terms of the game, they might play similar champions. But I think it's a very different environment when you go from someone who is a native speaker, but he is a rookie, so he might be quite quiet, then going to Gory, who's a very experienced player who probably understands what he needs in the game. He understands when he needs to be and everything like that. So I think if they want to make a deep run, they need to pick one and just stick with it. And they moved to Gory after that first Honu series. So they're probably not going to play him. But if they did, they might sprinkle him in versus a lower team just to give him more of a trial. But if they were sprinkling him in, I would be more concerned that they're splitting time and that's going to affect them in the long run.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess considering that's what was just said, it's pretty much a perfect segue then to go over to the other side of the bracket, and we can talk about Frank Esports and Team Bliss, because I think this one is also, at least in my eyes, pretty clear. I think Frank should pretty handedly 2-0 this. And sort of on the same topic of the whole two mid laners splitting scrims, do you think Frank are going to be utilizing both mid laners? Because at least from their stage games, certainly at the latter half of our round robin, they did start to bring in Pretender a whole lot more, pretty much just splitting games between Jimmy and Pretender as they did in spring. Do you think they're both going to get to see time? And do you have like a preference, whether it be play style or how the team acts around one of them, to either Pretender or Jimmy in playing for Frank Esports?
I definitely think it's going to be a 2-0. I think if it's not a 2-0, there's something gone terribly wrong. However, I do think they looked quite poor in their stage 2, despite J-Team leveling up in maybe some shaky games. But to be honest, when they went into the second part of the group stage, I thought they should have just won 6-0. They should have won all their best of threes 2-0, and they didn't. They looked pretty shaky, and that's a little bit worrying, but they should be able to 2-0 TB. But going on to the mid laners, they're definitely going to keep splitting. It seems to be more prominent with their approach going into the second stage. I assume that's preparing for playoffs. They have two pretty similar styles, but I would describe it as the team plays a lot better with Pretender in, but Jimian is more of a pop-off player and might be able to carry games himself. So if they want to shift into playing more around top lane or AD, I think that lends itself more to Pretender playing. But if they want to keep sticking with AP jungle and AD mid, Jimian is probably the better carry to have in that scenario. But I do think, in my opinion, the best way for them to try and beat the top teams would be to put Pretender in and play around Wacko. They haven't done it much this split. I'm not completely sure why. I think they've been a bit stuck on this mid-meta where everyone's kind of struggling. If you don't have a very good mid laner playing these AD mids and a very good carry jungler playing AP champions, you kind of just like this shaky, terrible team. And lots of teams have been really struggling with this. The only team who hasn't, of course, is PSG, who just have it very comfortably and is completely chill them. And then DCG can also get away with it, but they don't have too many carry jungle picks, just the Nidalee for them.
And the Amumu.
The Amumu is a really good pick. I wouldn't classify it as a carry, though, but I'm glad they found that. So many teams, they were stuck on Zyra and Brand, which are very strong picks, but their players just cannot play it. Their team just cannot use it. But PSG has been the only team to do that. And I think Frank has been one of those teams who's been just stuck on it. They try and stick to the meta. They're afraid to break it. When they do try to break it, the game just goes terribly and then they revert back. But I think if they want to try to beat the top, they should probably play a bit more around top or bottom lane, stick Pretender in, hope that a mage meta comes back, somehow pray that all the AD carry mids have gone away and they have a chance. So, but yeah, I think that going in for the first couple of group stage games, they'll probably split, just sharing games, alternating.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, ultimately, like, the performance between the two mid laners, it didn't seem to impact them that much. Like, you know, it's just, if they had Jimmy in, they tended to win. If they had Pretender and they tended to win. Obviously not against PSG Talon, but no one really was. I think it was honestly like a really good showing from Frank at the very first round robin when they were just taking games off CFO and PSG Talon, right? They were the first team to be able to take a game off both of those two different sides. So I think Frank, they certainly, when they're in their highs, they are possibly the team with the highest highs often, maybe discluding PSG Talon, but yeah, I agree with you. They've looked very shaky recently, even going up against Halpigs, who admittedly, they changed their roster. They didn't let Godtone play those last couple of series, and it still felt like, this is a roster of Frank Esports that shouldn't be going to 40 minutes up against Halpigs, and they were. That was not actually easy for them to get it across the line. And that's a concern, I guess, going into playoffs. The good thing is, of course, they now have a week to sort of work out those kinks, work out what they want to do, how they want to approach the draft. And I also agree with you, looking at the sort of Waco situation where you look back to PSG Talon last year, there were so many games where you weren't even sure that PSG were going to win. It would get to like a 40-minute team fight and Waco would just completely 1v9. I don't think he's really had the opportunity to shine as much in Frank Esports as he had last year over in PSG Talon. It'll be cool to see them play around him a little bit, give him some of the resources that perhaps is going over to Jimmy and as well as sometimes Jung, but less often than the mid lane.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there is a small issue with the support because last year Wacko, he got to play with Woody, and Woody can actually play range champions. Kyron cannot play a single range champion. So playing any sort of like Aphelios Lulu is just not possible. However, I did think there would be more resources, especially given Frank had played with Eminem for however many years and he got all the resources. So I thought it would just be a very clear plug and play situation, but it hasn't been. But I think they should be able to ease through the first series and then probably challenge DFM quite strongly in the second.
Okay, yeah, completely agree. And on that, DFM versus West Point, I think both of us probably in agreement here that it should just be a pretty clear 2-0 for DFM. Depending on the scheduling, I think West Point probably should be... I mean, I don't know if they necessarily lose to Bliss, but there's a good chance. It's between Bliss and West Point first to get eliminated, I'd say, but West Point have looked like they can't really get it together. I think the only person on that roster who has ever even looked like they might carry a game is 1116. And it seems like out of all the mid laners, he is the least likely to receive resources, which is kind of weird, right? Like, it feels to me in the past that Kongyue would often play around mid laners. In this split, it hasn't happened so often. And maybe it's a team cohesion thing, Kongyue coming in later on into the split. But I feel like they haven't really found any identity. They've not really found a strength in any aspect, really, of the game, whether it be early, mid, late, team fights, laning, whatever it is. They haven't really found a way to play and a way to play to any of their players' individual strengths. So what do you think they have to do to try and ease those pains, to try and find some way to play? I mean, maybe not expecting them to beat DFM, but going down to the lower bracket, taking on Team Bliss. What do you think they have to do to make sure they can actually get that series across the line?
I think what's important for them is just to find one singular style and just ace that. And whatever they want to play around, maybe it's some sort of scaling AD, but they do have a problem where top and support are somewhat running it down too many games, which is a bit of a problem because they are using them as primary engage tools. Kongyue is very famous for not playing any tank junglers extremely well. He is a carry jungler. Yeah. He can play things like Sejuani, Maokai, but I do not want to see him playing Sejuani, Maokai. I would much rather see him just lock in a random assassin and try to 1v9, to be honest. But if they were to find a style, it really needs to be some sort of AD mid and just some sort of carry jungler and just a scaling AD and just try to scale and keep the game relatively close. They have some games where it's quite close and then it just explodes. Just something just goes terribly wrong, and then as soon as they're behind, they just start chain inting. They're trying to like climb back onto the map. They have no cohesion, just getting anything from behind. So once there's a small deficit, it's completely over, in my opinion, for them. But if they want to try and beat TB, just draft something which is going to be stable, nothing which is going to explode. If TB start playing some scary picks, which are kind of like Feast or Famine, maybe they play some crazy bot lane like Kalista or Draven, things like that, you just want to remove it. You don't want anything like that. You just want it to be very calm and try to scale as much as you can. But yeah, like you say, they really just do need to leverage around jungle mid being their best players. They need to find something comfortable and just spam that for 1 week and hope that it works on stage.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I've kind of covered all the teams in the first stage of the playoffs. We'll briefly cover sort of DCG and PSG Talon, which should segue into sort of talking about what we think is going to happen going into Worlds, as well as SoftBank, sorry, and that should sort of take us over to what we think is going to happen into Worlds. So I want to start with, I guess, DCG, at least in my opinion, in all of the playoffs and sort of, you know, both the regions, all three of the regions, sorry, coming over. Definitely the most interesting team, in my opinion. Obviously, I mean, just having Cascada, he doesn't care what a meta is generally. Now he's just happened to land himself in his absolute perfect meta. But even looking back to last year, you know, it didn't really matter what the meta is. He's just going to pick what he thinks is right, which I think is something that a lot of teams globally should probably look into doing. I know TL over in NA is famous for doing that with APA in the mid lane, and it works out for them. It's working for DCG. Do you think they're going to be okay, especially, you know, they're in the latter stage of the playoffs. The teams are going to have time to warm up. They'll have time to read what the teams are doing, admittedly. But do you think they're going to be okay? Because they are very strong in their mid-jungle, especially how they play together, as well as Orca playing with 665 as well. But there is a massive glaring weakness, and that is Taco just randomly dying in side lanes. It is way too often now that it's like, wow, we are finding so much on one side of the map, and Taco is greeting for like 3-4 minions at his tower and just going down, and it's like, probably doesn't need to happen. You know, it's you're losing more by being at that tower than just backing off and looking for something else to do. Do you think that in particular is going to be exploited? Because it's something that we know PSG Talon can exploit in them. But do you think other teams, like do you think SoftBank Hawks is going to be able to do it? Obviously, Evie, probably as an individual, will be capable of doing it. As well as whoever comes out of the lower stage. I mean, it's going to be really up to them to be able to, as DCG will get to choose who they go up against.
Yeah. So overall, I think DCG, they have a chance, but I do think they need to adjust their style a little bit. I think going into stage 2 of the groups, they kind of surprised everyone, but I do think PSG did a little bit of, I won't say they were trolling, but I would say they were completely open. They were just letting, they were just happy for DCG to do whatever they wanted. I would call it like rolling with the punches in boxing, where PSG would just, do whatever, we'll do whatever, just see what happens. It kind of like felt like a solo queue game. And then PSG started to try a little bit at parts of the game, but they didn't really care. But then they played against CFO, and they do look to struggle in the slower games, which is a bit of a problem. If they explode bot and then convert it into mid and Cascada can carry, great. But sometimes they explode bot, and as you say, Taco is just completely inting the game, and then the mid-game fights don't go too well. It can be a problem. Now, I do think it is a problem against Evie, because if you remember back to spring, SoftBank's played against Frank, and they just camped the living hell out of top lane and just blew up the game. And I think that's going to happen again. I think Evie's just going to only play ranged champions. They're going to try to get red side. They'll just play TF, Vayne, whatever. These might not even be Evie's best champions, but they'll just camp top and just explode the game through there. At least that's what I think they'll do. And if I were DCG, I would try to study that series specifically from spring, where they just camp top, blow up the game. Because no matter how much they're going to blow up bot lane, it just seems to not matter against these slightly better teams who have a bit better macro, and they can scale slower. They don't let the game just completely explode. And especially if they're playing things like Nidalee, which is forever going to be, once she's ahead, she looks great. Soon as you lose one fight, oh no, Nidalee's on even gold. And then it's just a big problem. But I think against SoftBanks, I think it is a really big problem for top lane. And if they get camped top lane, is a really big problem.
Yeah. I think, Nidalee kind of quickly turns into Soraka with a spear, right, as soon as it's somewhat even. And I feel like I had this with Udyr last split, where it should probably be only PSG Talon allowed to pick that champion, because they're the only team that don't just pick Udyr, go up 20 CS and do nothing with it. You know, they're actively like, they'll go even in lane. Like RJ would go even in CS in lane, but he was not in lane. He was just invading your jungle, and it's the same as Junja. He's the only one that's actually finding a real value out of the Nidalee. You know, a lot of these junglers, they'll be Nidalee against Sejuani, and they'll get an extra 3 camps. It's like, whoop-de-doo, we got a dragon, we got 3 void grubs. It's like, doesn't matter, you've taken my jungle, I'm still Sejuani and you're Nidalee. And I think, yeah, it's only Junji really showing promise on that. Do you know if, I haven't been able to catch a lot of the LGL, but Forrest, is he sort of playing these AP carry junglers, or is he still sticking to the likes of the Lee Sin? That was one of his standout champions last split. It's obviously what got SoftBank a lot of their wins as well, was off the back of his Lee Sin. Is he been able to adapt personally into these AP style champions?
I think he's been able to adjust reasonably well, but LJL is very much just AP jungle, AD mid, very meta. There is nothing crazy going on in LJL, sadly.
Yeah, okay. So I guess that's one thing that's uncertain if we do see a DCG versus SoftBank matchup, right, is that DCG are by far the most willing to not play meta. Like, they don't ever seem to care. They're the only team in the PCS that has been willing to take these mid lane matchups into their logical conclusion, right? Going, instead of just picking, you know, oh, it's going to be an Ezreal Zeri lane or a Corki Ezreal or whatever it is. They're like, well, we're picking these ADs to get priority mid. They're starting to pick Lucian because it beats the Corki and the Zeri. What beats the Lucian? Caitlyn, Draven, Kalista. You know, like, they're very good at realizing how the meta is shaping out and just taking it to its logical conclusion and kind of forcing you, I guess. Like, my way of looking at it is, it's like, instead of now playing these ADs and, you know, Cascada's going to play one of these lane dominant ADCs, you can just start to look for things like Syndra. At least that makes sense in my opinion, because, you know, Syndra struggles when you're against gank setup. These AD carries don't provide that, does well into the AD carries, and so you can kind of come full circle in that regard. Do you think SoftBank as a team are going to be able to sort of realize that, pick into what DCG wanted to? Because DCG tend to win, at least in my opinion. They win through the draft, but they also very much lose through the draft. And if you find a way to play against their drafts, they kind of get stuck, and we saw that in spring as well. Are SoftBank able to do that? Because they seemed fairly uncontested in the LGL, and it maybe looked like they didn't really have to adapt too much. They could just play whatever and be the better players.
Yeah, kind of as you say, they really didn't get pushed. They didn't have to show too much or really try too much, it felt like. But coming into the playoffs, I would say that they are probably the least likely team to make any sort of adjustments because it was so easy for them. They're probably going to look at the patch notes and think, you know what, I think AD carry mids are still okay. The AP jungle nerfs aren't too big. So I think if there were a team to not adjust and get the meta completely wrong, it would be SoftBanks. However, I do think the AD carry mid, AP jungle is still completely viable. But if there were a team to find the counter to that, as you say, would be DCG. Now, Cascada can probably play all of those champions very well off meta. It just so happens that at the moment is AD carries, which are his best. So yeah. DCG are happy to go off meta, but it might just be that this one time going off meta might not be as much of an advantage as they currently have. Because right now, going into the AD carry mids, so many of the players just could not play AD carry mids. They just look terrible on it. But Cascada is an ADC player. It's extremely easy for him. But against SoftBanks, if he wants to move off into something like Syndra, as you say, maybe he's not a very good Syndra player compared to his AD carry picks. Now, that's not to say he can't play at a proficient level, and it's probably a good enough level to win. But I think that lowers the value of DCG, because when you look at these 5 players on paper, you would never put them as a top 2 team in PCS. You just look at those 5 players and you're like, no way. So when you think about them being maybe just not as popping off as they are currently, maybe they'll struggle against SoftBanks. But yeah, going back to it, SoftBanks, they won't adjust to anything. So DCG, if they find something and truly believe in it, they've got a very good chance in surprising.
Yeah. I feel like every team, this is like maybe not the greatest analysis in the world, but I feel like every team now going up against DCG have to either be able to pick the Amumu or just concede they're going to have to ban it, because it honestly just functions so well into, especially if you're playing these AP junglers and the AD carries. Like, Amumu's always been good into AD carries, you know? You just become very hard to kill. You do a lot of damage. You lock them down. You force cleanse. The mid lane AD carries aren't even taking it. So it's just always been good into that sort of situation. It also does really well into the AP junglers. If you could get onto them and stun them with your ult, they pretty much just roll over, right? So I feel like this Amumu champion is very, very strong currently. Like in the sort of meta that we're seeing, there's not really any tanks that it's having to deal with. It's just completely 1v9ing, at least for DCG. And so, yeah, whether it be DCG or PSG Talon, whoever it is, I think this Amumu champ needs to probably be either you've had to work something out to go up against it, basically, because it kind of seems unfair You just have a Predator missile running around in your jungle. But what is your take on the Amumu, I guess, is sort of where I'm getting to, because it's a very niche pick, pretty much only DCG picking it up, and it doesn't feel like anyone's able to work out how to play against it.
Okay, so first off, I think Amumu is great. It's actually pretty funny. I was talking to the Ground Zero coaches maybe a month ago or something. They randomly picked it on stage. They even told me it was a terrible Amumu spot, but they just picked it for some reason. And we were talking about it, and I was adamant that this champion must be very good in the meta. You're against 2 or 3 AD carries, because there might be a TF top or a Vayne top or something. I was 100% sure that it would be good. And it's kind of in the vein where Maokai Sejuani, where you have these like pseudo AP champions that can clear decently well, but they're not just a super tank and they're going to get ran over by the other AP junglers. I also think Nunu probably fits in this, but no one wants to touch Nunu at the moment. It's a bit more spicy maybe. But I think right now Amumu is very strong. I think they are the only team that's seeing the value. It's extremely good against Ashe and Zeri because of the E. You make that damage 0. It's like a very fun interaction. I don't know if many teams are thinking about it in draft, but I think it is a big problem. Yeah, they probably don't even know the Zeri or Ashe interactions with Amumu. You're probably right there. But I think it is a big problem if they continue down these 80 carry veins. But I think some teams are going to start to pivot more to Jace. We saw this a bit more in LCK and a bit more everywhere, seeing some Jace pop up. And now that champion doesn't struggle as much versus Amumu because you're not auto-attacking as much. But if teams start to pivot to Jace, then Amumu's value comes down a little bit. But overall, Amumu is still extremely strong. And I think SoftBank will probably ban it because they'll probably want to reduce volatility going into the draft. Take away anything crazy. So anything they're not familiar or comfortable with should be taken off the board. And I think that's the best way for quote-unquote better teams to win, is just reduce volatility, keep it simple. And that's probably what SoftBank will do, just 3 Amumu bans in hope that they win 3-0.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. We'll go and talk about PSG Talon now. I mean, it feels like, there's a lot you can talk about, but there's also not a lot to talk about, right? Like, they're just being very dominant. They lost one series, and I kind of agree with you in the sense that they had already locked in first. The series before that confirmed that they were just coming out as first place, and they've always, as a team, traditionally, they get first place and they try and hide as much as possible. I think that's evident through the fact that Ginger just played 3 straight games of Lilia. Didn't necessarily make the most sense to play Lilia in those games. Picked it anyway. And they did drop that series. But other than that, it was just pretty much a flawless entire split. I didn't really notice many mistakes coming from many of the players whatsoever. They'd have teams try and lane swap on them, completely destroy them. They would lane swap on people, completely destroy them. And it seemed like there was just no one that could find an answer to whether it be just the strength of the players in PSG, how they're able to play the meta. Maple's always been good at the AD carry mids. Ginger, he wants to be the carry. He hasn't really had the opportunity until this split. And Arja just seems uncontested best top in the league, as alongside Woody in that support role, and Betty just the most solid AD carry as well. It feels like there's no real holes in this roster. Do you think there's a team that is going to be able to upset them? SoftBank took them to 5 last split. Do you think they can do the same? Do you think they can beat them? What are your thoughts, I guess, on PSG Talon, both throughout the split and going forward?
Okay, coming into playoffs, they're clearly the top tier team, and there is quite a gap. But in true PSG fashion, every single BO5 seems to go to Game 5 over the past 4 years or so. I don't know. They kind of got it together over the past year or so. I think maybe because Maple came back, they've definitely seemed a lot more crisp and clean. But something is wrong with this team where they go into BO5s and they're like, you know what, let's go Game 5. So I think there's always that option. I don't know why it happens, but in best of 5s, it's not always the draft. So obviously the Worlds incident is very famous for the draft problem.
Kaiser.
Yeah, but it's not always the draft problem. They just go into a BO5 and something just magically goes wrong. But they have really good mental, really good vibes in this team now with Betty. I remember watching all the MSI vlogs they had. They just seem so happy all the time. And I know that in previous iterations of the team, maybe it was not like this. So I think in the BO5, even if something goes terribly wrong, they don't have the mental boom aspect anymore. The drafts seem a lot more cleaner because they just have every single champion available to them, it seems like. And they kind of seem impenetrable. But if there were a team to do it, I think is probably DCG, because I think
Yeah.
if there was the chance where DCG finds something new, a new iteration on the meta, because I don't think the current state where they're playing AD carry mids and Nidalee jungle, it might take a game or two, but I think they need to find something else, another step to surprise PSG, because they haven't been surprised. They win most of the games just early game and just gets blown out. And then against DCG got some good early leads, and then PSG were kind of like, oh, okay, what's going on here? We don't have a 5K lead from just macro, because
Yeah.
PSG aren't winning by having like 10 kills at 10 minutes. They have like 2 or 3 kills. They're up 5 plates mid, 5 plates top. Betty's up 10 CS. They've got a dragon. They've got 6 grubs. Everything's gone, and they're just chilling. So I find it very, very difficult to imagine a world where they completely collapse, because they're so much better than the previous versions. Previously, they
Yeah.
might go to a game 5, but you could always see it. You think, maybe PSG are a little bit shaky. And even in spring, you could see, maybe something might go wrong. It's not the perfect meta for them. Junjia, like, he would pick some tank junglers because that was the meta, and you're like, you don't want it to happen. You would much rather him just lock in Graves and try and 1v9. And they did that a couple times, and it might lose, but that's what you wanted to see. You just wanted to see it because you knew that would be their best iteration. And now that just happens to be the meta for all of summer. Now, if we go into playoffs, and let's say that the meta is magically not AD carry mids and AP junglers, maybe the changes are significant enough. If it just does revert to Maokai Sejuani and a mage mid or Jace, then it could open the window to where, hey, we haven't played this for many months. We're not too sure on the meta right now. There could be a problem with that. But as you say, I think they have the most consistent top laner. I don't think he is necessarily the best in terms of high highs, but he is very consistently good. He's not going to run it down too much. They have the best jungler, they have the best mid, and a very stable bot lane. And I think against DCG, the only chance is DCG just blow the game up. And against SoftBanks, it's probably just a consistency gap where the players are just a little bit too better. And then it will probably look like the winner's final. Because the upper bracket final, where it was 3-2 for PSG, felt very surreal because, in my opinion, SoftBanks should have won that game 5. It was Maple's Nico completely 1v9 the game. So many insane 5-man ults.
I couldn't believe it, man. That was like the turning point for PSG Talon. You know, up until that entire spring split, they're like pretty shaky. You know, like you never really had full confidence that they were actually going to be the team going to MSI. That Nico ult happens, and it's like, oh well, they're going there. You know, it's like that kind of just sealed the deal there, at least like for me personally. And then they never looked even shaky again. You know, from going into MSI looked great. Yeah, the series against G2 sucked, but you know, going to game 5 against BLG again, not expected by anyone, did fantastically there, pretty much shocked the entire world. Coming back to summer, completely unstoppable. It was like that Nico ult is where I pinned down the moment PSG truly turned on. You know, it was like up really until there, questionable. That happened, boom, done.
Yeah, it is kind of insane to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's what you get out of having just someone with the experience Maple has, you know? Like, he's been around since Season 5. The guy's been in every single meta. He's been in pretty much every single situation that League of Legends Esports has to offer. And, yeah, that's sort of the moment you get out of a player like that. And it's good to have someone like him, because there is, you know, Junja can just have an absolute pop-off game. Betty's had absolute pop-off games. So has Maple. But just having someone there that's like, oh, we're a bit behind, but you're on a champion that can turn it around, and being able to find that angle and do it, I think, is something as well that bodes well for them in the future, both regionally and internationally, if they do make it. Who do you think has been the best performing member of PSG Talon this split? Because I feel like this is a very hard sort of thing to talk about. My opinion is Woody, and I can flesh out on that in a bit, but I'd like to ask you your opinion first and see what your reasonings are.
I'd say it's probably RG in top lane. It might be a controversial take, but the way that he destroyed Driver in the CFL series really, really surprised me, because Driver is supposed to be this big upgrade on top of rests, and he gets his counter picks or carries. And just every game, he was just destroying him, which I didn't think would ever happen. And then the other top laners just aren't as good. Maybe like Frank's top laner with Yijiang. He's okay sometimes, and then pretty bad other times. He's kind of hit or miss. Yeah.
He's very fun to watch.
Yeah, he is the most fun top laner by far, but it seems to be the Frank style. So it's like YSKM and then Solo Kill and now him.
Yeah, that's
All
true.
these players,
That's actually so true.
they will go to LPL, they will be crazy, they have very high highs, but they also have very low lows. But it's actually, I think in spring, no one would say he's by far the best. He was very good on Udyr. He was amazing on Udyr, but he would sometimes lose to other people, and you're like, you know what, maybe it's not the best. But I think in summer, the gap from him to the other people extended compared to other ones, which maybe didn't. Now, Jinjia, he's just on his meta. It's expected for him to be the best. Maple's on Tristana. He's played it for 7 years or whatever. It's just like, okay, you know what he's going to do. He's going to play the map fine. And then Betty's kind of just vibing. I don't know like what he's doing half the time. He's just vibing, chilling. He's doing whatever.
Just 1v1ing bot. It's like whatever.
It's just, I think compared to last summer, where Betty was obviously 1v9 on a weaker team, compared to this Betty, where he's just chilling, it's kind of impossible to say he's been the best one. But I think Woody is also a good shout, where the meta has changed and it's really helped them.
Yeah, I think like the reason I sort of put Woody is that a lot of times there's like a play happening and one team will have Woody there, like he'll be level 6, the other support's level 5, and he's still like at the objective first or whatever it may be, but it just feels like compared to every other support, Woody is just like the entire package, you know, like he's able to play the other styles, the enchanters, the range, which most other supports don't have that flexibility of being able to do all 3 at once. And he does all 3 as like the best support in the league. His engaged supports this split have looked so immaculate. Like I don't remember off the top of my head any time he's like mechanically misplayed. Obviously there was that Omega grief that PSG did against DCG where they're just level 1 Zeri Leona trying to contest 3v2 against the Krugs and they got dove 3 times in a row on repeat. But like fun. Other than that, I think it's like there's not really any seeable mistake that Woody's made, and I think that's like pretty insane from a support in particular because there's a lot of supports that they just see someone that they can Zenith Blade or like Leona engage or Nautilus engage on, and they'll just do it. Doesn't matter. They don't think about anything else. Like, where's my top lane? Where's my mid lane? Who cares? They just go set it and they just die and you don't have vision for the next 30 seconds. And I think Woody's like the only support who's never found himself in a position like that. So that's sort of why I give it to him. I think it's sort of hard to do that in a competitive environment. And he's just able to do it so consistently that I like really appreciate that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think the past 1 or 2 years, I've actually been quite down on him. When he first came into PSG, I thought he was pretty good. And then the meta kind of swapped to Enchanters, and he would just play Lulu and Nami. And I was like, okay, he plays Lulu and Nami. I can play Lulu and Nami. He's not really doing much. And then his engaged champions for a long time were pretty int. He looked very bad. But that version of PSG over the past 2 years, they've had some pretty rough times where everything doesn't look sort of perfectly together. But now, as you say, he's the only one who can play range champions other than Orca, who can also play it. But it's not the perfect sort of time for DCG to be doing that sort of thing, as it feels like. But as you say, he plays all 3 champions, or all 3 versions of the support role. He can play everything that's asked of him to an acceptable level. It doesn't need to be completely 1v9, but he's not griefing. And that's all PSG need, is him to just not run it down, and everything's going to be fine.
Okay. I'll have like just 2 more quick questions. One will be a more serious one and then a little fun one to finish that I've kind of enjoyed asking. First of all, I guess just who do you think is going to Worlds out of all of these teams? For me, I'm going to go with, it's hard. PSG Talon is the obvious one. And then there's 3, maybe even 4 possible choices to go with. I think I'll go DCG on hoping just because I love watching them. It might not be our best chance internationally, but they are certainly, at least for me, the most fun team to watch.
I think I'm going to stay safe and I'll go PSG and SoftBank. I think they'll just be too controlled, and DCG, they might just be the new flop when it gets to playoffs. But I hope not. Yeah. Well, the new format this year with like best of 3s is much less likely for you to flop in playoffs compared to past years where we had some good BO1 teams and then got into the BO5 and oh no, they look terrible.
Yeah. That was J-Team, I remember, like, Minji just
MVP.
Giga smurfing. And then he gets, but I remember, like, real quick, was it summer? He gets, like, the MVP of the regular season. His first playoff games, he's, like, 8-0 as a Zero, and he lost that game. I was like, How does that ever happen? It was the most, it was.
I think
it
they
was kind of sad.
Did they go 0-6? I can't remember.
Yeah, they just got a, they went 0-6. Yeah, and Driver was like the only person trying to win the game. It was kind of sad. It was like a complete collapse of how
it really
good
was.
they actually looked during regular
They
season.
got solved, quite quickly.
Yeah. Last question, I guess, before I'll let you go and carry on with your day. With our, how we do the 1v1 side selection. Obviously, yourself, I believe you're in Grandmaster. Is that right? If I remember.
Yeah, about. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So if you were to do a side selection, one of the 1v1 showdowns, you could choose anyone from the LJL, the PCS, and the LCO. Who would you want to go against, and what champion would you pick?
Okay. Do I have to win, or just for the experience?
Well, it can just be for the experience. Like, I asked Tally this question earlier, and he said Maple because he's always looked up to him and respected him as a player. So you can take it either way you'd prefer.
I think I'd probably pick Pretender, because he's one of my friends. And it'd be funny if I could beat him. I think I'd go for Pretender. Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. And everyone, if you aren't aware of who Molecule is, definitely go check him out on Twitter. He has a lot of insights over especially the VCS, the PCS, as well as does a lot of stuff on NA and LEC as well. So definitely check him out on Twitter. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.